Nobody expected the most powerful woman in Chicago to fall for a man who couldn't even afford the wine list. But the night Ethan Cross walked into Vertigo Sky Lounge with flowers still fading from his sleeve and the wrong tie knotted twice, nobody was laughing at him. They were laughing at her, the billionaire CEO who'd apparently run out of options. Whispers sliced through the rooftop air like broken glass. Phones came up, photos were taken, and somewhere between the cruelty and the candlelight, two people looked at each other across a table the world had already decided was a mistake. This is the story of what happened when neither of them walked away. If this story finds something real inside you, hit that like button, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this one travels. The reservation was under someone else's name. That was the first thing Ethan noticed when he gave his name to the hostess at Vertigo Sky Lounge and watched her scan the tablet with that particular brand of patience that wasn't patient at all. She scrolled again, pressed her lips together in a way that suggested his name hadn't appeared and that this was somehow his fault. Cross, he said again. E-T-H-A-N. My friend Marcus made it. He might have put it under... Ah! She found it. Something shifted in her expression. Not warmth exactly, but recalibration. Table 14. Right this way. He followed her through the restaurant and tried not to feel out of place, which was difficult because he absolutely was. Vertigo sat on the 42nd floor of a building in River North, and the entire north wall was glass. Nothing between the diners and Chicago's skyline, but a sheet of engineered transparency and 42 floors of altitude. The tables were dressed in white linen that had probably never met a bottle of dish soap. Candles burned in votives that cost more than his car payment. The ambient lighting was the color of a sunset that had been approved by a committee. Ethan was wearing the suit he kept for weddings and funerals. He'd had it pressed. He'd noticed a loose button on the left cuff at 6:48 p.m., 12 minutes before leaving, and he'd sewn it back on himself, standing at the kitchen counter while his daughter sat on the counter beside him, handing him thread with the grave seriousness of a surgical nurse. "Is it crooked?" he'd asked. "A little," Sophie had said, "but it's okay, Daddy. You look handsome." 7 years old and already more generous than most people he knew. He'd kissed her on the forehead, told Mrs. Pelham next door that he'd be back by 10, and driven his 2019 Civic to a valet stand where the attendants had the professional grace not to visibly react to the make and model. Now he was at table 14, a corner spot with a candle and a city view and an empty chair across from him, and he ordered sparkling water and told himself not to check his phone. He checked his phone. Marcus had sent 3 texts in the past 2 hours. "She's incredible. Seriously, don't mess this up." Followed by, "I mean that in the most supportive way possible." Followed by, "Just be yourself, but like a good version of yourself." Ethan put the phone face down. He'd agreed to this because Marcus had spent 6 months wearing him down and because Sophie had looked up from her cereal 2 weeks ago and asked, completely without preamble, "Daddy, are you ever going to have a girlfriend?" He told her he was focused on her. She'd considered that for a moment and then said, "But what about when I'm at school?" and gone back to her cereal like she'd said something obvious instead of something that had lodged itself under his ribcage and hadn't moved since. He didn't want to be here. That was the truth. He was 32 years old and he had a 7-year-old daughter and a job managing inventory at a mid-sized distribution warehouse in Pilsen. And his life was not the life he'd planned, but it was his life. And he'd built something in it, something small and real and quietly good. And the idea of complicating it with a stranger across a white linen table made his stomach do something unpleasant. But Sophie's question had followed him to bed and back out again for 14 days. "What about when I'm at school?" So here he was. He was examining the wine list with the expression of a man reading a ransom note when he became aware that something had changed in the room. It wasn't loud. That was the thing about certain kinds of social cruelty. It didn't need volume. It operated at frequencies designed to reach the target and no one else, or at least that was the pretense. What actually happened was a ripple, a shift in the ambient attention of a room, chairs turning by degrees, conversations pausing at the seams. Ethan looked up. She was walking toward him. Victoria Hale was not what he'd expected. He hadn't known much going in. Marcus had kept details vague, said only that she ran a tech company and that she was brilliant and that Ethan would understand when he met her. What Ethan had constructed in his mind was some composite of professional competence, probably dressed in all black, probably already looking at him with the calculated assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating things quickly. What he got instead was a woman who walked like she'd decided, somewhere around age 25, that the world's opinion of her entrance was no longer her problem. She was wearing a deep burgundy dress, fitted through the waist, her dark hair swept back from a face that was open and angular and currently doing a careful practice job of not reacting to the room, reacting to her. She was plus size, full-figured, the kind of body that restaurant rooms in River North apparently required commentary on, and she was 30 years old and she was the CEO of Hale Systems, though Ethan wouldn't learn the last part for another 40 minutes. He stood up. That seemed to surprise her. Small thing. She covered it quickly, extended her hand, and said, "Ethan," in a voice that was direct and a little tired and not at all performing. "Victoria," he said. "It's good to meet you." They shook hands. He pulled her chair out. That surprised her again. He clocked it in the slight pause before she sat. Around them, the restaurant continued its quiet theater. He could hear, or thought he could hear, the whispers at the table to their left. Two women in their 40s with the particular brand of tight amusement that passed for discretion among people who had no intention of actually being discreet. One of them glanced over. Her gaze traveled from Ethan to Victoria and back again with the speed and conclusion of a calculation that had already been run. Ethan picked up his menu. "Marcus told me almost nothing about you," he said, "which I'm choosing to interpret as either a good sign or a very bad one." Victoria looked at him over her own menu. "He told me you were straightforward. I thought that meant boring, but apparently it means you just go directly to the judgment call. I prefer to think of it as efficient." She seemed to be deciding something. "He told me you have a daughter." "Sophie, 7. She's with a neighbor tonight, and she made me promise to tell her what the restaurant looked like, so..." He glanced around with performative thoroughness. "Fancy, very shiny. There's a candle." Victoria's mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something that was considering becoming one. "She sounds like a thorough researcher." "She's relentless. She wanted photos, but I told her that was weird." "It's a little weird." "I know. I still almost did it." The waiter came. Victoria ordered a glass of Cab Franc without looking at the price. Ethan ordered the same and told himself it would be fine. The waiter left. "So," Victoria said, and she set her menu down and folded her hands on the table with the ease of someone accustomed to running meetings. "What do you actually do?" Marcus was vague. "Inventory management at a distribution company in Pilsen. Exciting stuff. Lots of spreadsheets, the occasional forklift crisis." "Forklift crisis. You'd be surprised." "I wouldn't, actually. I started in logistics." She said it like she was testing something, watching to see if he'd react with disbelief or forced enthusiasm. He did neither. Marcus said tech. "Now. Before that I spent 2 years in supply chain software. Before that I was in graduate school for computer science, which I did not finish, which my mother has not forgiven." "How long ago?" 8 years. "She's still holding it?" "She's holding it," Victoria said, "like it was yesterday." Something in her face shifted. Still controlled, but differently controlled. Like she was used to keeping things in a shape that was presentable, and occasionally the shape slipped. She had a very specific idea about what a degree from Northwestern would lead to, and then I built a company instead, and she is, she paused, complicated about it. "My father wanted me to go into real estate," Ethan said. "I almost did. I spent about 8 months studying for my license. Then I didn't." "What stopped you?" He thought about whether to answer that honestly. He decided to. "Sophie's mother left when Sophie was 4 months old. I kind of reorganized around that." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Not the uncomfortable kind of quiet. The kind that was actually listening. "That's a heavy reorganization," she said. "It was." He picked up his water glass. Renee, Sophie's mother, she had postpartum depression that got bad in ways neither of us understood at the time. She left to get help. That was the plan. The help turned into a new life somewhere else, and Sophie and I figured out our version of things. He said it plainly, without the rancor that people sometimes expected from that particular story. He'd had 7 years to find the plain version. It is what it is. She's great. She's this whole entire person. You love talking about her. Constantly. It's a problem. The food came eventually, and the conversation went somewhere easier for a while. They talked about Chicago in summer, about a neighborhood taco place that Marcus had also apparently recommended to both of them as the best in the city, about a bad movie they'd both seen and hated in the same specific ways. The wine was good. The city below them was doing what Chicago does on summer nights when the sky goes the right kind of blue. But the room had not entirely moved on. Ethan became aware of it the way you become aware of a small sound that's been there the whole time. Not suddenly, but cumulatively. He noticed the man at the bar who'd taken a photo with his phone pointed not quite casually in their direction. He noticed the couple at the foretop by the window, the woman leaning to say something in her companion's ear while her eyes drifted toward Victoria with an expression that required no translation. He noticed the waiter from another section who lingered a beat too long near their table for no reason related to service. He didn't say anything. He kept his attention on Victoria, and he let the conversation stay where it was, which was in a place that had gotten more real than he'd expected for a first date arranged by a mutual friend on a Tuesday. Then the thing happened that he'd been quietly bracing for. There was a table of 5, maybe 20 feet away. A work dinner, it looked like. 3 men and 2 women in the casual, expensive clothing of people who'd come from an office that didn't require suits. One of the men, broad-shouldered with the particular ease of someone who'd been handsome for long enough to assume it was permanent, leaned back in his chair and said something to the table in a voice pitched just wrong. Not a whisper, not a declaration, but something in between. The social weapon of a person who wanted their audience to hear without having to claim ownership of the words. Ethan caught, "Must have a really good pension plan," and the laughter that followed it. He went still, not visibly. He didn't change his expression or his posture, but something in him locked up, the way it does when you register something as wrong and have to decide what to do about it before your body does something your brain hasn't approved yet. Victoria had heard it. He was certain she'd heard it because he saw what happened to her face. Not a flinch, not tears, nothing that dramatic. Just a very small, very practiced adjustment. The kind of micro recalibration that happens when something lands on a bruise that's been there for years. She reached for her wine glass with a steadiness that was not natural. It was engineered. He watched her pull herself together at the molecular level and felt something in his chest go quiet and hot. "Hey," he said. She looked at him. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to know it's not a deflection." He held her eyes. "What made you say yes to this? To tonight? Marcus said you'd been turning him down for months." She looked at him for a moment like she was trying to figure out what he was doing. "I had a bad week," she said finally. "What kind of bad week?" "The kind where you're sitting in a conference room with 12 people and you realize that half of them are there because they're waiting to see if you'll fail." Her voice was even, professional even, which was different from actually even. "And you make every right call in the meeting, and you still walk out feeling like—" She stopped, set her fork down. "Sorry, that's not first date conversation." "It's fine. It's not the point." "Maybe it is the point," he said. He wasn't trying to be clever about it. "I think you said yes because you're tired of performing for rooms full of people who've already decided about you." The look she gave him then was complicated, wary and tired and something else. Something that was trying to figure out whether he was perceptive or performing at her. He'd seen that look on people who'd been handled by enough charming men to develop a detailed taxonomy of it. "I'm not trying to read your mind," he said. "I'm just saying I understand the feeling. Minus the billion-dollar company." 100 million, she corrected automatically, and then something in her face shifted into something that was genuinely, unexpectedly amused. Which I know sounds insane as a correction. A little bit. "My company's worth—" She stopped herself, laughed quietly, reluctantly, like she hadn't planned to. "This is a strange first date." "It really is," he agreed. "You're not what I thought you'd be." "What did you think I'd be?" She considered him. either desperate or overconfident. The two options men seem to present. "I'm a little desperate," he said honestly. "My daughter told me 2 weeks ago that she worries about what I do while she's at school, and I've been thinking about it ever since. That's mostly why I'm here." The honesty landed between them, and neither of them immediately moved away from it. "She sounds wise," Victoria said. "She's 7 and she reads encyclopedia entries for fun. She's terrifying." Victoria smiled then. Actually smiled, the first unguarded one, the kind that starts somewhere real and arrives on a face without asking permission. It changed the whole geometry of her face. She didn't look softer exactly. She looked like herself. "I like her already," she said. Ethan felt the thing in his chest do something that was either anxiety or the first threat of something he didn't have a name for yet. He picked up his wine glass to have something to do with his hands. From the table to the left, one of the women in their 40s stood to go to the bathroom and passed their table close enough that Ethan heard, very clearly, the 3 words she murmured to her companion as she passed. "What a waste." He set his glass down. He turned his head and looked at the woman. Not in confrontation, just looked at her, the way you look at something you need to fully register. She noticed. Her step stuttered. He held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds and then turned back to the table. "I'm sorry," he said to Victoria. She shook her head. Her jaw was set. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I'm choosing to." He looked at her steadily. "They're wrong." The words were simple. He hadn't embellished them. He hadn't tried to fold them into a larger statement about the world or about beauty standards or about the fundamental indecency of strangers. He just said the thing, the plain true thing, and left it there between them. Victoria looked at him like he'd said something in a language she'd been studying for years but rarely heard spoken aloud. "You know," she said after a moment, "every man I've dated in the last 4 years has been very careful not to mention anything that might indicate he'd noticed I wasn't," she paused, chose the word with precision, "conventionally proportioned. Like if they just never said anything about it, it would be a non-issue. Is it better when they don't say anything?" "It's dishonest," she said. "They noticed. They just decided the polite thing was to perform obliviousness, which meant I spent every dinner waiting for the moment the performance would slip." She looked at him. "You're not performing." "I'm not. You're a person who gets treated badly by strangers at restaurants, and that's wrong. And pretending I don't see it doesn't make me a gentleman. It just makes me a coward." She was quiet. "Also," he added, "for what it's worth, and I'm aware this is the least important part of what I just said, you look genuinely great. For whatever that's worth from a guy with a sewn-on button." Victoria looked down at his cuff, then back up at his face. "Did you sew it on tonight?" 12 minutes before I left, Sophie helped." She laughed. "Not the professional version. The real one, the kind that has a sound and takes up space and doesn't care if it's too loud for the ambient vibe of a 42nd floor restaurant." A woman at a nearby table glanced over with an expression that contained equal parts annoyance and confusion, as if laughter at that volume was a violation of the building code. Ethan found himself smiling before he'd decided to. They stayed for another hour after dessert had come and gone, talking in the unhurried way of people who'd stopped watching the clock, and the city below them blazed and glittered in that particular Chicago way, aggressive and beautiful and indifferent to being observed. The table to the left cleared out. The broad-shouldered man at the work dinner left without looking their way again. The restaurant thinned. Candles burned lower. At some point, he couldn't have said exactly when, the thing between them stopped being a blind date and became something else. Something that didn't have a clean category. She told him about building her company from a 2-room apartment in Wicker Park, about the investor who'd laughed at her first pitch, about the day Hail Systems software had been adopted by a logistics network covering 11 states, and she'd sat in her car in a parking garage for 20 minutes because she hadn't known what else to do with what she felt. He told her about the morning Sophie had walked into the kitchen at 5 a.m. and announced with total conviction that she'd decided to be a marine biologist who also wrote mystery novels, and the way he'd said, "Okay, both of those sound achievable," and meant it. He told her, carefully, about what it actually cost to love someone who needed everything from you. Not as complaint, not as martyrdom, but as fact. She listened in the way very few people listened, without filling the silences prematurely, without reaching for the adjacent story about themselves. "You're good at this," she said when he'd finished. "At what?" "Talking about something hard without making it sound like a tragedy or a triumph." He thought about that. Sophie wouldn't appreciate either. She'd rather I just said the true thing. "She taught you that?" "At considerable personal cost, yes." Outside, when they finally came down from the 42nd floor and stood on the sidewalk in the thick summer heat of Chicago at 11:30. On a Tuesday night, there was a moment of that particular awkwardness that happens when a date has gone better than expected and no one wants to be the first to name it. "I had a better time than I was prepared to," Victoria said. "Likewise." He paused. "Can I call you?" She looked at him. Her face was unguarded in the streetlight in a way it hadn't been inside the restaurant, where there'd been an audience. "You can call me," she said. A car pulled up. Her car, private, she'd clearly arranged it. She moved toward it, then stopped and turned back. "The button," she said. "It held up." He glanced at his cuff. "So it did." "Tell Sophie the restaurant was very shiny, and the city looked like someone spilled a bag of lights." He felt the smile move through him before it reached his face. "She'll love that." "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Victoria." He watched the car pull away into the river of red taillights on Michigan Avenue and stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the heat, the city noise wrapping around him, and thought about what had just happened. He wasn't sure what to call it. He wasn't sure it needed a name yet. He walked back to his Civic. The valet brought it around without expression. He drove home on the expressway with the windows down and the radio off. And somewhere around the Pilsen exit, he thought about the sound of her laugh. The real one, the unguarded one, and how it had taken up exactly the right amount of space in the room. He parked in front of his building, checked his phone, found a text from Marcus. "So?" He put the phone in his pocket and went inside. Sophie was asleep in her bed with a book open on her pillow, a children's encyclopedia of ocean life, one corner bent back at a chapter on cephalopods. He closed it gently, pulled her blanket up. She stirred but didn't wake. He stood in the doorway of her room for a moment the way he did sometimes, just to have the thing that was real be the last thing he looked at before sleep. Then he went and sat at the kitchen table, and he texted Marcus back. "She's extraordinary." Marcus replied 17 seconds later with 5 consecutive exclamation points and an emoji Ethan did not understand but interpreted as enthusiasm. He closed the phone, put it face down on the table. In his mind, somewhere quiet and without theater, he said her name to himself once, Victoria. And then he got up, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. He called her on Thursday. Not Wednesday, which was when he'd wanted to, because wanting to call someone the next day after a first date felt like information he wasn't ready to hand over. Not Friday, which felt calculated in the opposite direction. Thursday was the honest answer. 2 days of trying to work and not thinking about the sound of her laugh in that restaurant, and then giving up and picking up the phone. She answered on the second ring. "I was wondering when you'd decide Thursday was the right choice," she said. He sat back in his chair. Through the warehouse office window, he could see 2 guys on the floor arguing about a pallet of misrouted medical supplies. "How'd you know it was Thursday?" "Because Wednesday would have been too eager and Friday would have been strategic. You don't seem like either." "And Thursday is honest," she said. There was something in her voice that was different from the restaurant. Less armor in it, or maybe the same armor worn more loosely. "Also, I've been busy today and I'm glad you interrupted." "What kind of busy?" "The kind where 3 different people schedule a meeting to ask me why I haven't responded to their emails yet, instead of just waiting for me to respond to their emails." "That tracks," he said. "What did you say?" "I said I'd get to them when I got to them, and then I spent 40 minutes getting to them, and now I'm sitting in my car in the parking structure because it's the only place in the building where nobody needs something from me." A pause. "Where are you?" "Warehouse office. There's a forklift situation developing that I'm choosing to ignore for a few minutes." "Is it serious?" He looked out the window. The 2 guys had been joined by a third and were now all pointing at the same pallet from different angles. "Probably not. Someone misread a shipping code. It happens." The glamour of logistics. It has its moments. He shifted in his chair. "I wanted to ask if you'd want to get dinner again. Or not dinner. Something without the production of it, if that makes sense. Just, he stopped, tried again. Sophie has a thing Saturday afternoon at the Natural History Museum, a kids' science program. I'm taking her. I don't know if that's too weird as a second thing, bringing a kid into it, but she's the context for most of my life, so. Silence. Not the uncomfortable kind. What time? Victoria said. He hadn't expected that to be easy. 1 o'clock? Send me the address. So that was how it started. Not with a second fancy restaurant, not with the formal architecture of dating, but with a Saturday afternoon and a 7-year-old who had prepared a list of questions about the Cambrian explosion and was not shy about deploying them. Sophie had known there would be someone joining them. Ethan had told her that morning over breakfast, keeping it simple. A friend from Tuesday night, someone he'd like her to meet, no pressure, just the museum. Sophie had listened to this with the grave attention she applied to most information and then asked, "Is she nice?" "I think so," he said. "You think so, or you know so?" "I know so." Sophie had nodded and gone back to her cereal and said nothing else about it, which was either a good sign or the calm before something exhausting. Victoria arrived 7 minutes late. She texted ahead to say so, which he appreciated, in dark jeans and a soft rust-colored sweater, her hair down, looking like someone who'd decided not to perform anything. She came around the corner of the museum's main entrance with her phone still in her hand and spotted them by the ticketing pavilion. And Sophie looked up from the museum map she'd been studying and evaluated Victoria with the unfiltered assessment that only small children are still permitted to perform openly. "You're taller than I thought," Sophie said. Victoria looked down at her. "You're taller than I thought, too." Sophie considered this. "I'm in the 78th percentile for my age." "That's impressive." "It's just genetics." Sophie looked at her father. "Can we go in now? The program starts at 1:15 and I want to see the meteorite first." They saw the meteorite first. They saw the Cambrian diorama, which prompted Sophie to ask Victoria whether she knew what an anomalocaris was. And when Victoria said she didn't, Sophie explained with the thoroughness of someone who has been waiting for an audience. Victoria listened, asked a follow-up question about predation hierarchy, and Sophie's entire bearing shifted 2 degrees in her direction, like a plant adjusting toward light. Ethan watched this from 2 steps back and felt something he didn't immediately have a name for. By the time they reached the science program, a hands-on experiment with density and pressure that Sophie had been looking forward to for 2 weeks, something had loosened between the 3 of them. Not completely, not without the awkwardness that was natural to the situation, but enough. Sophie claimed the seat next to Victoria at the demonstration table without asking and proceeded to correct the program facilitator twice, politely but firmly, which made Victoria press her lips together in an expression that was trying not to be a grin and failing. After, they walked to a taco place 3 blocks from the museum, the same one Marcus had recommended to both of them. Sophie ordered with the decisiveness of someone who'd made this choice before and didn't need the menu. "You knew what you wanted before he even gave you the menu," Victoria said. "I looked it up online," Sophie said. "I always research before I go somewhere new. My dad says that's being prepared. My teacher says it's a little intense." "I did that too," Victoria said. "At your age. And also last Tuesday." She looked at Ethan. "I Googled the menu before our date." "I also Googled the menu," Ethan said. Sophie looked between them with the expression of someone surrounded by her own people. The afternoon broke apart eventually. It always did, that was the nature of things. But when Ethan walked Victoria to her car, parked 2 blocks over in a side street that had eaten a parking meter at some point and never replaced it, the day had acquired a weight that he felt in his chest. Good weight. The kind that reminded you something real had been there. "She's extraordinary," Victoria said. "I know." He paused on the sidewalk. "She liked you." "She tolerated me," Victoria said, "which, from what I can tell, is the higher honor." He laughed. The air between them was warm and specific, and neither of them moved toward their next thing immediately, which was its own kind of answer. "I want to see you again," he said. "Then see me again," she said, like it was simple. And maybe it was. It wasn't simple. Not entirely. The weeks that followed had the particular texture of something real being built, which meant it was mostly good and occasionally uncomfortable, and never as clean as the good parts made it sound in retrospect. They found rhythms. Thursday phone calls that started practical and ran long. Saturday afternoons when Sophie's schedule allowed for it. Twice, a dinner that was just the two of them, one at a small Vietnamese place in Uptown that Victoria loved, and one at his apartment where he cooked badly, and she ate it without comment except to ask if he'd used garlic powder instead of fresh garlic, which he had, and they'd had a minor and completely genuine argument about it that ended with him conceding the point and her being gracious about winning it. Sophie evolved her opinion in increments. The tolerating became including. She started saving things to tell Victoria. Printouts of articles about deep-sea bioluminescence, a drawing she'd made of an Anomalocaris that was, Ethan had to admit, pretty accurate. Victoria received these with the same quality of attention she gave her board reports, which Sophie could somehow sense and responded to accordingly. "She doesn't talk down to me," Sophie told Ethan one evening, with the satisfaction of someone issuing a verdict. "Most adults don't mean to." "Most adults do it anyway," Sophie said, and that was that. What Ethan hadn't anticipated, he'd known it was coming theoretically, but the reality of it was different, was the public part. He didn't have a public exactly. He was a warehouse manager in Pilsen with a small circle of people who cared about his life. But Victoria did. He learned this gradually, then all at once. The first time was a photo. Victoria had mentioned it to him obliquely. "There's a picture going around." And when he looked it up, he found a blurry shot taken at the museum, zoomed in. The two of them standing near the Cambrian exhibit with Sophie between them pointing at something. The caption, posted by an account with 400,000 followers who covered Chicago money and power, read, "Hale Systems CEO, Victoria. Hale spotted with mystery man and child at Field Museum. New development in the CEO's personal life?" The comments ran to several hundred. Most of them he stopped reading after 45 seconds. "How often does this happen?" he asked her that Thursday. "It varies," she said. The professional even voice was back, the one that processed things before releasing them. "I've been covered since the Series B round. People treat it like public information." "Your personal life?" "My whole life," she said. "When I gained weight 3 years ago because I was working 80-hour weeks and barely sleeping, there was a whole comment section about it. When I started losing it again, there was a whole comment section about that." A pause. "I've had to learn that the coverage exists independent of anything I do, like weather." He thought about that. "That's a terrible way to describe something that affects you." "It's accurate, though. You can't argue with weather. You can dress for it or not." "What do you do when it's bad?" She was quiet. "I work," she said, which is not a healthy answer. "I didn't say it had to be healthy." She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "I go for long drives sometimes. Terrible for the environment. I know exactly which roads out of the city feel like nothing." He thought about her in her car in the parking structure, the one place nobody needed something from her. "You said you've been judged for your weight since college," she said. "Before that, but it calcified in college. I was the fat girl in CS who built better systems than anyone else in the department and still got passed over for the first team lead position, which went to a guy whose code I'd been cleaning up for 2 semesters. She said it without drama, the way you say something that happened so long ago you've stopped needing it to be a bigger story. "I've been underestimated in very specific ways for a very long time. I learned to use it. People who dismiss you stop watching closely, and then you can move." "Is that how you built Hale Systems?" "Partly." She paused. "Partly I just worked until my hands hurt and then worked some more. The underestimation angle is more satisfying to tell at conferences." Something wry in her voice. "The actual story is a lot of spreadsheets and bad coffee and one very patient attorney who believed the model before the numbers proved it." "What's her name?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "His name is Gerald Park. 70 years old, never raised his voice once in my presence. He's the reason Hale Systems has the IP structure it has." A beat. "Nobody ever asks about Gerald." "I'm asking." "Why?" He thought about it. "Because you mentioned him the way you mention someone who matters, and those people are usually invisible in the official story." Another silence. This one had something different in it. Not discomfort, something adjacent to being caught, like he'd seen something she hadn't arranged to be seen. "You do that," she said. "Do what?" "Notice things people don't usually notice." She didn't say it like a compliment exactly, more like an observation she was still working out the implications of. "It's—" She stopped. "It's what?" "It's disconcerting," she said, "in a way I haven't decided about yet." He let that sit. He'd learned she needed room around certain things, not time exactly, but circumference. She'd moved toward what was real when she was ready, and pushing the perimeter just made it harder. "Take your time deciding," he said. She exhaled. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night." The thing neither of them spoke about directly for the first several weeks was the simplest thing, whether this was serious. They were doing serious things. They were in each other's weeks. Sophie had started asking when they'd see Victoria next as a regular logistical question, the way she asked about dentist appointments and school events. Victoria had started referencing things he'd told her in later conversations, not as callback, just as retained information, as if his life was a file she was actively maintaining. Those were serious behaviors, but naming it felt like touching something live, and they were both, in different ways, for different reasons, people who'd learned to be careful with live things. He knew what was underneath it for him. There had been 3 women in the 7 years since Renee left, each of them good in their way, each of them running eventually against the same wall. Sophie was not a side note. She was the main event. She wasn't a complication to be managed or a charming feature to be accommodated. She was his person, the fixed center of his life around which everything else arranged itself. And the women who'd tried to love him without fully accounting for that had eventually found the math didn't work. He'd stopped explaining it after the 3rd time. He'd started assuming that eventually a woman's patience for it would locate its limit, and he'd stopped being surprised when it did. He'd stopped a lot of things. Victoria hadn't hit the wall. She seemed, in fact, not to register it as a wall at all. Sophie was just there. The same way Victoria's work was just there, a given condition of the environment rather than an obstacle. He wasn't sure what to do with that. And he knew what was underneath it for her, or he was starting to, not because she'd said it plainly, but because it emerged in pieces, the way real things do. She'd had relationships. She said so when he asked, directly, on a Thursday in early September, when they'd been doing whatever this was for 6 weeks, and he wanted to understand what he was working with. She said yes, there had been men. She wasn't inexperienced. And then she said, with the precision of someone who'd had time to examine a pattern, the ones who stayed too long made me feel like I should be grateful. The ones who left made me feel like I'd always known they would. He'd sat with that. "What does grateful look like in that context?" he asked. Like I was lucky," she said. "Like they were doing something generous by being with someone who looked like me. And I was successful by then. I had more money than most of them, and they still managed to make me feel like I was getting away with something." Her voice was careful and honest and a little tired. "I'm aware that sounds like I'm describing bad men. Some of them were bad men. Some of them were just ordinary men who'd absorbed ordinary ideas about what women were supposed to look like. And they thought they were being progressive by dating me. And that was somehow worse." "Why worse?" "Because they wanted credit for it." A beat. They'd managed to work it into the conversation somehow. How much they didn't care about weight. How irrelevant they found conventional beauty standards. As if they were announcing a virtue. A dry sound that wasn't quite a laugh. And I'd smile and say something and think, "You are telling me about yourself right now, and you don't even know it." He thought about what he'd said to her at the restaurant. They're wrong. He hadn't announced a position. He'd just said the thing. He wondered if she'd cataloged that in the same file she was building on him. "You're waiting to find out what I want," he said. She didn't answer immediately. He could hear her in whatever room she was in, the small ambient sounds of her environment, a keyboard, traffic far away, someone in a hallway. "Aren't you?" she said finally. "I'm not waiting anymore," he said. "I think I know." "And?" "And I'd rather tell you in person." Another silence. Then you'd better come over, she said. He went over on Saturday morning, and Sophie was at a classmate's birthday party, and Victoria made better coffee than he expected and worse eggs than he expected, and they sat at her kitchen table in her apartment in Lincoln Park, which was enormous and full of books and contained, somewhat disconcertingly, a whiteboard in the living room covered in network architecture diagrams that she'd been working on at midnight. And he said, without preamble, "I'm not here because of your company. I'm not here because of your money. I want to be clear about that, and I want to say it once and not have to keep proving it because I'm not going to keep proving it." She put her coffee cup down. "I'm here," he said, "because you listened to me talk about Sophie for 45 minutes on a first date and asked real questions. Because you explained to a 7-year-old the difference between apex predation and opportunistic feeding and took her seriously when she corrected you on one point. Because you're honest in a way that costs you something, and you do it anyway." He held her eyes. "That's what I know." Victoria looked at him across the kitchen table. Her face was doing the thing again. The micro-recalibration, but slower this time and in a different direction. Less armor, not more. "I'm not easy," she said. "I know. I work too much. I'm bad at asking for help. I've been told I'm controlling." "Probably accurate." "I'm serious." "So am I." "None of that changes what I said." She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, Lincoln Park was doing what early September does in Chicago. That last warm spell before the temperature remembers itself. The trees still full, the light coming in sideways in gold. "Okay," she said. "Okay." She picked up her coffee. He picked up his. They sat in the not-quite silence of her kitchen, her whiteboard visible through the doorway with its incomprehensible diagrams, his jacket thrown over the back of her couch, the coffee better than anything he made at home. It wasn't perfect. That was the thing about it. He would step on something fragile in her without meaning to, 2 weeks later, when he made a comment about her schedule that landed wrong. He hadn't meant it the way it landed, but it landed hard, and she went quiet in the way that was actually cold rather than processing, and it took 3 days and a direct conversation to work back to level ground. She would worry in the weeks after that she'd overcorrected, become too careful, too managed with him. And she'd pull back slightly in a way he'd notice but not immediately understand. They'd have to figure each other out. That was the honest reality of it. But the thing was there. Whatever it was there. And it was growing roots in the specific soil of their actual lives, in Sophie's encyclopedia printouts and Victoria's midnight whiteboards and Thursday phone calls and bad eggs on Saturday morning. And neither of them was walking away from it, which was when the world, in its way, decided to pay attention. The coverage started picking up in October. A gossip site ran a piece titled, "Who is the Man Dating Chicago's Most Powerful CEO?" It was thin on facts and heavy on implication, the kind of article that frames its questions as concern while delivering its conclusions in advance. What does a warehouse manager want with a billionaire executive? How did they meet? Is this a PR move or something stranger? Victoria sent him the link without comment. He read it, put his phone down, picked it up again and texted her. "You doing okay?" She replied after a few minutes. "I've had worse. My board is going to ask questions Monday." He stared at that for a moment. What kind of questions? Her answer came back flat and direct. The kind that are really statements. He understood what that meant. He just didn't know yet how far it would go. He would find out. The board meeting was on a Monday, and Victoria didn't tell him how it went until Wednesday. That gap, 2 days of short text, clipped responses, the particular brevity of someone managing something they hadn't yet found words for, told him more than the eventual phone call did. When she finally called, it was past 10 at night, and he could hear in her voice the specific exhaustion that isn't about sleep. "How bad?" he said, skipping the opening. She exhaled. "Define bad." "Victoria." "It wasn't a formal objection," she said. "Nobody put anything on the table. It was careful. The way they get when they want to say something without being on record saying it." She paused. "Richard Mosley asked me in the most collegial tone imaginable whether I'd given thought to how my personal visibility might affect Q4 investor sentiment." Personal visibility. That's the phrase he used. I almost admired it. Ethan was sitting at his kitchen table, Sophie was asleep. The apartment was quiet in the way it got after 9 when the street noise thinned. What did you say? I said I'd given it exactly as much thought as it deserved. A beat. Which he interpreted as a yes. It wasn't a yes. No, she said. It wasn't. Another pause. Longer. He's not the worst one. He's just the one willing to be the face of it. There are 3 others on the board who've been uncomfortable since the photo ran. They haven't said anything directly. They don't need to. I can read a room. What do they actually want? They want me to end it quietly and let the story go away. She said it plainly, no drama in it, the way she said things that had cost her something to process. They think you're a liability, not personally. They don't know you. You're a category. Unvetted, unknown, lower income bracket, single father with no profile. In their framework, you're a variable they can't model, and they don't like variables. He let that sit. And what do you want? She didn't answer immediately. He'd learned to read her silences by now. This one had edges, the kind that meant she was being honest with herself first before she could be honest with him. I want to not have this conversation, she said, which is not the same as wanting to walk away from you. I know. She stopped, started again. I built this company for 9 years. Every decision I've made, every trade-off, everything I gave up, it's all inside Hale Systems. And I know that sounds like I'm choosing the company. I'm not choosing the company. I'm just telling you what it costs to even have this conversation. You don't have to choose, he said. Ethan, I'm not saying it to be easy. I'm saying it because it's true. You don't have to choose right now, and I'm not going anywhere while you figure out what you want. He heard his own voice and made sure it was steady. But I need you to not let them make the decision for you. That's the only thing I'm asking. Silence. Okay, she said. Okay. They stayed on the phone for another 20 minutes, talking about nothing important. Something Sophie had said that week. A problem in Victoria's codebase that her development team had been chasing for days. And when they hung up, Ethan sat at the kitchen table for a while longer and looked at his hands. He wasn't naive. He understood what he was, a 32-year-old warehouse manager who drove a 2019 Civic and sewed his own buttons and had not, by any measurable external metric, arrived. He understood that in the architecture of Victoria's world, he was a strange fit. He'd understood that from the night at Vertigo, when the room had taken one look at them together and started doing arithmetic. What he hadn't understood, until now, was that the arithmetic was being done by people with actual power over her life. He went to bed. He didn't sleep well. Richard Mosley was 54 years old and had been on the Hale Systems board for 3 years, installed during the Series C round by a venture capital firm whose name was on the term sheet and whose preferences tended to run toward a very specific type of leadership: profitable, photogenic, uncontroversial. He had silver hair and a firm handshake, and the particular charm of men who'd spent decades in rooms where charm was a professional tool rather than a personality trait. He'd been polite to Victoria's face for 3 years and careful behind her back for approximately the same period. He was also, Ethan would eventually learn, the reason things got worse. It started with a story. Not the gossip site, something sharper, more targeted. A piece ran on a mid-tier financial blog with enough credibility to get picked up and enough ambiguity to avoid libel. It was about Ethan, though it used careful language. Sources close to the situation. Questions have been raised. Those familiar with Hale Systems' leadership structure note concerns. The story alleged, without stating directly, that Ethan Kross had a pattern of pursuing women in positions of financial power. It cited an anonymous source. It mentioned, incorrectly, that he'd left a previous relationship under disputed financial circumstances. There was a photo, the Field Museum one, zoomed closer this time, and a comment from a person identified only as a former acquaintance who described him as strategic. Victoria texted him the link at 7:43 a.m. on a Thursday. He read it twice. Then he called her. "This isn't true," he said when she picked up. "I know. The financial circumstances thing, that's fabricated. There were no disputed financial circumstances. Renee left and we agreed on custody, and that was it." "Ethan, I know. I need you to know that I know you know," he said, and heard how that sounded. "Sorry, I'm angry," she said. "You're allowed to be angry." He was. He was standing in the warehouse parking lot because he'd walked outside the moment he'd finished reading, and the November air was hard and cold against his face, and his jaw hurt from how he was holding it. Who ran this? Working on it. Her voice had gone into a mode he recognized, the one she used when she was running a problem, active and precise. It went up at 6 this morning. The sourcing is deliberately vague, but the specific detail about disputed financial circumstances didn't come from public record. Someone made it up, which means someone constructed it, and that takes resources and intent. Mosley. A pause. "I don't have proof." Victoria. "I don't have proof yet," she said, and the yet landed with the weight of a woman who'd already decided what she was going to do about it. "What happens if it spreads?" "It already has." She said it without softening it. 3 outlets picked it up in the last hour. 2 more have reached out for comment. He could hear her moving, the brisk sound of someone covering ground. "I'm not commenting. Gerald says say nothing, let it run, don't give it oxygen. But the investors are going to see it. And the board. They've already seen it." Another pause. Mosley sent a group message to the board 40 minutes ago. He called it a matter requiring due diligence. The cold air was sharp enough to make his eyes water. He stood with it. "What does that mean?" "It means he's using it," she said. "He knew about this before it ran. Maybe not who published it, but the existence of it. The timing is too clean." He planted it. "I don't have proof. I know." He exhaled. "What do you need from me?" She was quiet for a moment in a way that was different from her other silences. Less controlled, more exposed, like she'd been caught on the back foot of something she'd been pretending to have handled. "I need you to not do anything," she said. "Don't respond online. Don't talk to anyone. If anyone from press contacts you, they already did. An hour ago. I ignored it." "Good. Keep ignoring it." A beat. "And I need to know you're not going to disappear because this got complicated." He heard what that actually was. Not a strategic question, a frightened one, under all the competence. "I'm in a parking lot in Pilsen," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." She breathed out. "Okay. Okay." Sophie found out at school. That was the part he hadn't anticipated, hadn't built defenses for, hadn't thought to protect. She was 7. She didn't have social media. The story existed in a world that was, as far as he understood it, separate from the world that contained second grade and science programs and encyclopedia entries about cephalopods. What he'd forgotten was that second grade contained other people's parents. She came home on Friday quieter than usual. He noticed it the way he noticed most things with her. Not immediately, but with the accumulated evidence of small signals. She didn't tell him about her day when she got in the car, which she always did. She ate dinner in a way that was mechanical rather than present. She helped him clear the table without being asked, which usually meant she was working something out. He waited until she was sitting on the couch with her ocean encyclopedia and then sat next to her. "You want to tell me what's going on?" he said. She didn't look up immediately, turned a page. Then, "Madison's mom said something." He kept his voice level. "What did she say?" "She was talking to another mom when they were picking up. I don't think she knew I could hear." Sophie's voice was careful in the way of children who understand more than adults remember to account for. "She said you were trying to take someone's money." The silence in the apartment was very complete. "Sophie, is that true?" "No," he said. "It's not true. Not even a little bit." She looked up at him then. 7 years old with the eyes of someone twice that. The eyes of a kid who'd grown up with a father who'd never lied to her and understood, on some molecular level, the difference between a true thing and a false one. "Someone wrote bad things about you," she said. "Yes? Because of Victoria?" He thought about how much to give her. He'd always believed in giving her the real version at the level she could hold it. "Because some people don't like that Victoria and I are together," he said, "and they're trying to cause problems." "Why don't they like it?" He looked at his daughter. "Complicated reasons. Some of them think I'm not the right kind of person for someone like Victoria. Sophie absorbed this. That's stupid, she said with total conviction. It is, he agreed. Victoria doesn't think that. No, she doesn't. Then why does it matter what they think? He exhaled. Because some of them have power over things Victoria cares about. Her company. Sophie was quiet for a moment. She looked back at her book, then back at him. Are you going to stop seeing her? No. Is she going to stop seeing you? No. She nodded, the single decisive nod of someone who has received sufficient data. Okay, she said, then it'll be okay. She went back to her encyclopedia with the authority of someone who'd resolved the matter. He sat beside her and felt something in his chest clench and release. After she was in bed, he sat at the kitchen table and typed a message to Victoria. Sophie found out. She's okay. She said, it'll be okay with more certainty than I currently have. Then he added, she's 7, and she's already the most sensible person I know. Victoria's response came back after a few minutes. Tell her thank you, and that the Anomalocaris drawing is still on my desk. He looked at that text for a while. Then he put his phone down and went to bed. Woke up. The shareholder meeting was scheduled for the 3rd week of November. He knew about it in outline. Victoria mentioned it the way she mentioned most calendar events, as context, not request. It was a quarterly review, larger than usual because Hale Systems was in the middle of a partnership negotiation with a logistics network in the Southeast that would represent the largest expansion in the company's history. The room would include the full board, the institutional investors, and 3 representatives from the potential partner organization. It was not the environment for a personal crisis. Mosley understood this. Ethan came to understand it too, gradually, over the 2 weeks preceding the meeting, as the shape of what was being done became clearer. The article hadn't been a single shot. It had been the first in a sequence. A second piece ran in the 2nd week of November on a business-focused site. More restrained but somehow worse, it raised questions about Victoria's judgment and leadership consistency, using the relationship as a lens for questioning her decision-making more broadly. It didn't name Mosley. It quoted 3 anonymous sources inside the company, which meant that whoever was running this had reach inside Hale Systems itself. Victoria told him this on a Tuesday, 7 days before the meeting. She was at her office. He could tell by the background sounds. 3 inside sources, he said. 3 people who talked to whoever wrote this, yes. Her voice was controlled in a way that required work. I don't know who. Gerald is looking at it, but it's... She stopped. It's not just about you anymore. Someone has been building a case. The relationship is the most visible piece of it, but there's more. Decisions I made in Q2 that I know were right being reframed, the partnership terms being characterized as reckless. A pause. This started before you. What do you mean? I mean, whoever is doing this was already doing it before our first date, she said. You're a convenient accelerant, but the fire was already lit. Something in her voice had shifted, the processing mode, the running a problem mode, but underneath it something rawer, something that was grappling with a betrayal rather than just a crisis. I've been in that boardroom for 9 years. I built this company in that boardroom, and someone in it has been... She stopped again. Undermining you, he said. Systematically, she said. The word landed flat and hard. He thought about the right thing to say and decided there wasn't one specific right thing. Are you okay? I'm not okay, she said, with the honesty of someone who'd stopped having the energy to manage the question. A sound that wasn't quite composed. I'm 9 years in and I'm sitting here wondering how much of what I thought was mine was actually being quietly taken apart, and I don't... She stopped. Her breath was uneven. I don't like this feeling. I know. It's not productive. It doesn't have to be productive right now, he said. Right now, it just has to be real. Silence on the line. He could hear her in it, the effort to keep the shape. I want to see you, she said. When? Tonight. Is Sophie... Mrs. Pelham can watch her. Give me an hour. He drove to Lincoln Park in the dark with the expressway wet from earlier rain, the city lights smearing amber across the asphalt. And when she opened the door, she looked like someone who'd been holding something very heavy for a long time and had gotten tired of pretending she wasn't. He didn't say anything. He came in. She leaned into him in the doorway of her enormous apartment with its whiteboard and its books and the faint background glow of a laptop still open on the kitchen table, and neither of them said anything for a while. And that was enough. They talked for 2 hours. About the board, about Mosley, about what Gerald had found. A thread of small sabotages going back 18 months, decisions quietly rerouted, information selectively shared, the kind of damage that's designed to look like drift rather than intent. About the partnership deal and what was at stake and what it would mean if the meeting went wrong. He's going to push for a vote of confidence, Victoria said. They were sitting on her couch, her feet tucked under her, a cup of tea she'd made and not drunk on the table. That's the play. He gets the shareholder meeting in the same room as the investor anxiety he's manufactured, and he calls for a review of my leadership authority in front of the Southeast partners, to humiliate you publicly, to make the case that I'm too distracted and too compromised to lead the expansion, she said. He positions himself as the voice of fiduciary responsibility, and I'm on the back foot defending my own judgment. Ethan thought about it. What if you don't let him run the play? She looked at him. What if you take the boardroom before he can? He said. You said Gerald's been finding things. If there's a documented pattern of interference, it's not complete. We have fragments. Is it enough to raise the question in front of the room? She was quiet, staring at the middle distance, the look of a person running something through several filters at once. It would be a risk, she said. Bigger than letting him run it? She didn't answer. She reached for her tea, found it cold, set it back down. If I surface what we have and it's not enough, I look paranoid. I look exactly like what he's been saying I am. Reactive, emotional, distracted. If you don't and he runs the play, you lose the room. She looked at him. When did you get strategic? 7 years of being a single father, you learn to read the board before the meeting happens. He met her eyes. You know your room better than he does. You've been in it longer. And you know what's true. She held his gaze. Something in her face was working through something he couldn't fully read. Not doubt exactly. Something more like a person deciding, finally, what they were willing to spend. I know what's true, she said. Then that's what you take in with you. She looked at him for another long moment. The lamp in the corner of her living room cast a light that was warm and specific and real, and outside the city was doing its indifferent nighttime thing. Traffic and wind and the distant sound of a train. Stay, she said. Not, she corrected herself. Just stay tonight. We can sleep. I just don't want... She stopped, slightly frustrated with herself for not landing it cleanly. I don't want to be alone with this. I know, he said. I'll stay. He texted Mrs. Pelham, who responded with 3 words. Of course, dear. Go. And he settled into Victoria's couch with the blanket she brought him, and she went to her room, and they were separately in the same space, and that was what was needed. And he lay in the dark of her living room with the whiteboard faintly visible from the kitchen doorway, and the city noise outside, and thought about the meeting 7 days away. He thought about what it would cost her. He thought about Sophie saying it'll be okay with 7-year-old certainty, the kind of certainty that hasn't yet learned to factor in the specific cruelties of boardrooms and venture capital, and men who plant stories. He hoped she was right. He fell asleep somewhere after 1 in the morning, and he didn't hear Victoria through the wall, but at some point in the night, the light under her door was still on. She was still working. Of course she was. She was 9 years and everything she had into a company that someone had been quietly trying to pull out from under her. And she was going to walk into that room in 7 days, and she was not going to lose. He knew that about her. He knew it the way he knew things that weren't spoken. The way he'd known from a Tuesday night on the 42nd floor that she was someone worth staying for. The light under her door burned on. The morning of the shareholder meeting, Ethan woke up at 5:15 and couldn't go back to sleep. He lay in the dark of his apartment, listening to Sophie breathe through the baby monitor he still kept on his nightstand, a habit from her infancy that he'd never broken, that she'd never questioned, and thought about a boardroom on the 31st floor of a building in the Loop where, in approximately 4 hours, Victoria would walk in and decide what kind of person she was going to be under pressure. He already knew what kind of person she was. He'd known since the night she'd leaned into him in her doorway because she'd run out of energy for the performance of being fine. That was the real version of her, not the CEO in the conference room, not the woman who could recite market projections the way other people recited their grocery lists, but the woman who made bad eggs on Saturday morning and left whiteboards full of half-finished ideas in her living room and fell asleep eventually after working until 2 in the morning on something that mattered to her. He got up, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table. At 5:58, his phone lit up. A text from Victoria. "I'm already at the office, couldn't sleep either." He typed back, "You know what you're doing." She replied, "I know what I'm doing. I'm less certain the room will agree." A pause, then. Gerald found 2 more incidents last night. Diverted communications from the Southeast partner in August. Mosley's assistant's email was in the thread. Ethan stared at that. "That's direct?" "It's close to direct. Gerald says it's enough to surface, maybe enough to act on." Another pause. "I'm going to go in early and brief 2 board members I trust before the general session. Lay the groundwork." "Good. If this goes wrong..." He didn't let her finish that sentence. "It won't go wrong. And if it does, we figure out what comes after." But it won't. She didn't respond for almost 2 minutes. Then, "Thank you for last week. For staying." He looked at that text for a moment. "Go win your room," he wrote back. He put his phone face down on the table, poured his coffee, and waited. He found out how it went not from Victoria but from Marcus, who texted him at 12:47 with a string of capitalized words that required some decoding but were clearly positive in nature. Then from a push notification from a Chicago Business News app he'd downloaded 3 weeks ago and felt slightly absurd about, Hale Systems board vote confirms CEO Victoria Hale's leadership authority. Internal investigation announced. And then, finally, at 2:18 in the afternoon, from Victoria herself. She called. He stepped out of the warehouse floor into the parking lot, the November air coming at him hard and flat. "Tell me," he said. She exhaled. It was a long exhale, the kind that's been held for hours. "It's done." "How done?" "Mosley is out." Her voice was careful and not quite steady and trying to be both. "The 2 board members I briefed this morning, Karen Yee and David Okafor, they came into the general session with me. When Mosley moved to open the floor on leadership review, Karen went first. She presented the communication record, the August email thread, 3 other instances Gerald had documented. A pause. It went quiet in a way I haven't heard a boardroom go quiet before. What did Mosley do? He said it was taken out of context. She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. He actually said that phrase, taken out of context, in front of 12 people looking at his assistant's email address in a diverted correspondence chain. The sound again, sharper this time. David called for a vote on immediate suspension pending investigation. It passed 8-4. 8-4, he repeated. There are 4 people who were in his corner. They'll be watched. Her voice went somewhere flatter. This isn't over. Investigations take time. His lawyers are going to be expensive and loud, but he's out of the room and the investigation is official and the Southeast partners... She stopped. They stayed. They asked questions, which is what you want them to do. And I answered them. And by the end of the session, the terms were back on the table. Ethan stood in the parking lot with his hand on the back of his neck and let out a breath he hadn't fully realized he was holding. Victoria, I know. You did it. Gerald did most of it, she said, and he could hear in her voice the complexity of that, the relief and the exhaustion, and the thing underneath that wasn't triumph exactly, but something more complicated, the feeling of having been right about something you'd wished you were wrong about. 9 years, she said. He's been on that board for 3 of them. I let him... She stopped. I was too focused on what was in front of me. I missed what was behind me. You didn't miss it. You found it. Late. In time, he said. That's what matters. She was quiet. He could hear her in the quiet, the office sounds, distant voices, the specific ambient noise of a place that had just been through something and was still figuring out its shape. I said something, she said, in the meeting, before Karen presented the record. Mosley made a comment, coded the way he does, about leadership judgment and personal decisions. He didn't name you. He didn't need to. Everyone in the room knew what he meant. A beat. and I decided not to let it land without answering it. What did you say? I said that my personal life was mine to manage, and that any board member who confused personal choices with professional competence was demonstrating their own limitations rather than mine. She paused. And then I said that the man he was implying was a liability was the most decent person I'd met in 4 years, and that the irony of being lectured about judgment by the person who'd been covertly undermining this company for 18 months was one I intended to document fully. He stood very still on the cold parking lot asphalt. You said that, he said, in front of 12 board members and 3 representatives from a billion-dollar logistics network. Another exhale. Gerald nearly had a heart attack. He told me afterward it was the most reckless thing I've ever done in a professional setting. Was he wrong? Probably not. A small pause. But I meant it. He didn't say anything immediately. The wind had picked up across the parking lot, the kind of November wind in Chicago that doesn't negotiate. He turned his back to it. Thank you, he said, simply. Don't thank me. I was angry. She said it honestly without dressing it up. I was sitting there in that room that I built and listening to a man who'd been stealing from it quietly for a year and a half use you as a weapon, and Her voice caught, not dramatically, just a small snag in the control. I was done being careful with him. Good, Ethan said. I'm going home, she said. I'm going home and I'm turning my phone off, and I'm going to eat something that doesn't come from a vending machine for the first time today. I'll come over. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. A beat. Bring Sophie, she said. Posto. Sophie took the request seriously, which meant she arrived at Victoria's apartment with her ocean encyclopedia, a completed drawing of a vampire squid she'd been working on for a week, and the specific social ease of a child who has decided a place is safe and therefore arrives as herself. Victoria was on her couch when they got there, still in her work clothes, but with her shoes off and her hair down, and the particular look of someone who'd spent 10 hours being formidable and now needed to be a person. She looked up when they came in. Sophie went directly to the couch without preamble and sat down next to her and opened the encyclopedia to the cephalopod section as if they were resuming something they'd been in the middle of. I finished the vampire squid, Sophie said, and produced the drawing. Victoria looked at it. The thing was genuinely good. Sophie had a precise hand and an eye for biological accuracy that she applied without self-consciousness. That's the bioluminescent organ, Sophie said, pointing. I looked up the anatomy. I can tell, Victoria said. Her voice had something in it that was softer than her professional voice, but different from her guarded voice, something that was just present. It's really accurate. I know, I checked twice. Sophie looked at her with the directness she applied to everything. Are you okay? You look tired. I am tired, Victoria said. Did it go okay, the important thing today? Ethan, in the kitchen, paused with the refrigerator door open. It went okay, Victoria said. Good. Sophie turned a page. My dad was worried. I know he was. He didn't say so, but he drinks his coffee too fast when he's worried. He had 3 cups this morning. Ethan closed the refrigerator. You noticed that? Victoria asked. I notice everything, Sophie said, without any particular pride in it. Just fact. She turned another page. What's a quorum? A quorum? My dad was talking about it this morning on the phone, something about a quorum in the meeting. Victoria looked past Sophie to where Ethan was now standing in the kitchen doorway. He gave a small shrug that said she hears everything. I've told you this. A quorum is the minimum number of people that need to be present to make a vote official, Victoria said. So if not enough people show up, the vote doesn't count? Exactly. Sophie absorbed this. That seems like a design flaw, she said. Victoria looked at her. It is, a little. Someone should fix it. Several people have thoughts on how, Victoria said. They haven't agreed yet. Sophie nodded as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected about adult institutions and returned to her encyclopedia. Victoria leaned back against the couch cushions and looked at the ceiling with the expression of someone releasing something they've been carrying all day. Ethan made pasta from what was in Victoria's kitchen. She stocked better ingredients than him, though he'd never told her he'd noticed that. And they ate at her kitchen table while Sophie narrated 3 separate facts about deep-sea pressure zones that none of them had asked for and all of them listened to. Normal. That was the word for it. Specific and a little imperfect and real. Afterwards, Sophie fell asleep on Victoria's couch with the encyclopedia open on her chest, the way she did when she'd decided somewhere was safe. That unconscious animal decision to go under in a place that felt okay. Victoria put a throw blanket over her with a care that was understated and precise, the kind of gesture that doesn't perform itself. They went to the kitchen and talked quietly. "What happens now?" Ethan asked. "With the investigation. It runs. Could be 3 months. Could be 6. She wrapped her hands around a mug. "Mosley's lawyers will make it slow. He'll claim the documents are mischaracterized, that the diversion was a miscommunication, that the vote was procedurally rushed. All the usual moves." She looked at her coffee. "But it's on record. It's formal. The Southeast deal moves forward. Karen Yee is the interim chair for the board restructure." A pause. "It's not clean. It won't be clean for a while, but it's not. It's not what it could have been." "And the stuff about me?" He said it plainly. "The stories." She looked up at him. "I issued a statement this afternoon before I left the building. Gerald helped me write it." She reached for her phone, opened it, handed it to him. He read it. It was brief and direct. Hale Systems CEO Victoria. Hale addresses recent media speculation. The company's leadership matters are the appropriate subject of board oversight, not public speculation. Allegations regarding Ms. Hale's personal relationships are without factual basis and are being examined as part of a broader internal investigation into conduct by a former board member. Ms. Hale's partner, Ethan Cross, is a private individual, and further comment on his personal life would be inappropriate. He handed the phone back. "Partner," he said. She looked at him steadily. "Is that okay?" "More than okay." He paused. "It's just, you said it publicly before you said it to me." "I said it to 12 board members and 3 logistics executives and 2 journalists on a press call," she said. "I'm saying it to you now." Her voice was direct in the way it was when she wasn't managing anything. "You're my partner, if that's what you want to be." He looked at her across her kitchen table in her Lincoln Park apartment with the city doing its nighttime thing outside, and Sophie asleep on the couch 10 feet away. "It's what I want to be," he said. She nodded. Something in her face released. Not dramatically, just a small lowering of something that had been held up for a long time. The weeks after the meeting were not simple. He'd known they wouldn't be, and he was right in the specific ways he'd expected and wrong in the ways he hadn't. The investigation ground forward in the way of official processes, slowly, with paperwork, with the periodic release of information that created new news cycles and then faded. Mosley gave an interview to a financial publication in which he described himself as a victim of corporate politics, a phrase that caused Victoria to read the article in silence and then close her laptop and go for one of her long drives. He went with her. They drove east on I-90 until the city let go, and she didn't talk for 40 minutes. And that was fine because she didn't need to. The stories about Ethan didn't disappear immediately, but they lost their oxygen without new material to feed them. The gossip sites moved on to other subjects. The financial blog that had run the original piece issued a quiet correction about the disputed financial circumstances claim, buried in a paragraph that most readers wouldn't find, but it was there. Marcus texted him, "Told you she was incredible." He replied, "You were right. Don't get used to hearing that." Marcus sent back 8 exclamation points. The harder thing, the thing he hadn't fully anticipated, was the residue that the weeks of pressure had left in both of them. Not in their relationship exactly, but in the way they moved around each other. Victoria had a period of 3 weeks in December where she pulled into herself in a way he recognized now. The drawbridge going up, not against him specifically, but against everything. The way people do after a sustained crisis, when the body finally has time to register what the mind had been managing. She canceled 2 Saturdays without great explanations. She texted more, called less. He gave her the room and also made sure she knew he was there, which was a calibration he had to work on. Sophie's direct question about how you knew when someone needed space versus when they needed you had become, unexpectedly, the most useful piece of relationship philosophy he'd encountered in years. You ask them, Sophie had said, when he'd put the question to her hypothetically over dinner one night. What if they say they're fine when they're not? Sophie had given him the look she deployed when adults ask questions with obvious answers. You ask them again, different words. He'd done that. He'd texted Victoria on the second canceled Saturday, not asking if you're fine, asking what you actually need right now. Could be space, could be something else. Either answer is okay. She'd called him 20 minutes later and they'd talked for an hour and a half, and she'd said somewhere in the middle of it, I don't know how to do this right. I keep waiting for the part where I manage you into a shape that fits my life, and then I realize I don't want to manage you. And I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to manage me, he said. I manage everything. I know. I'm telling you that I'm not in that category. She'd been quiet. Then, it scares me a little when I can't manage something. I know that too. He'd held the phone. I'm not going anywhere, Victoria. You've heard me say it enough times that it should be wearing a groove by now. It is, she admitted. I'm just... A long pause. I'm not used to people who mean things when they say them. Get used to it, he said. I have time. She'd laughed, small and real and unguarded, the one that took up the right amount of space. He drove to Lincoln Park that evening, and she buzzed him up without asking who it was, which meant she'd been waiting for the buzzer, which meant she'd known he was coming even though he hadn't said so, which meant something about what they'd built that he didn't need to name. At the end of January, 4 months after that first Tuesday night at Vertigo Sky Lounge, 2 things happened in the same week. The first was that Hale Systems issued a formal announcement. The Southeast Partnership was finalized. 31 states. The largest expansion in the company's history. The press covered it comprehensively, and for the first time in several months, Victoria's name appeared in headlines without an accompanying question about her personal life. The second was that Ethan got a phone call from Mosley's lawyers. He was at work when it came through. A number he didn't recognize, a woman's voice, formal and careful, explaining that she represented Richard Mosley and that Mr. Mosley was prepared to offer a financial settlement in exchange for a signed statement from Ethan, affirming that the articles about him had been independently reported and had not been commissioned or coordinated through any party affiliated with Hale Systems leadership. He listened to the entire thing. Then he said, I need to understand this correctly. You're offering me money to sign something false. The lawyer's voice shifted register slightly. The settlement offer is framed as, I heard how it was framed, Ethan said. The answer is no. Mr. Cross, I'd encourage you to consider... I've considered it, he said. The answer is no. Don't call this number again. He hung up. Sat for a moment at his desk in the warehouse office with the floor noise coming through the walls. Forklifts, pallet jacks, the PA system calling someone's name in a way that suggested it wasn't the first time. Then he called Victoria. Mosley's lawyers called me. He said when she picked up, offered a settlement for a false statement. Silence. Then, tell me exactly what they said. He told her. He heard, while he told her, the particular sound of her going very still. They called you directly, she said, without going through me. Apparently, that's... A controlled pause. That's going to Gerald today. I assumed. He leaned back in his chair. I want you to know I said no. I know you said no. I want you to know it wasn't a difficult decision. Another pause, this one different. I know that too, she said softly. I just needed you to hear me say it. She was quiet for a moment that had a specific quality to it, the kind where someone is deciding whether to say the real thing or a managed version of it. He waited. Ethan? She said. Yeah. I know. Just that. 2 words, but they carried the whole weight of the last 4 months in them. The restaurant, the museum, the couch at 2 a.m., the meeting, the canceled Saturdays, the phone calls that ran too long, all of it, compressed into 2 syllables that meant something more than their face value. He understood. I know too, he said. The forklift bay outside his office started up. Someone dropped something metallic on the warehouse floor with a sound that echoed off the corrugated walls. His coffee was cold. The fluorescent light above his desk had been flickering for 3 weeks in a way that facilities had promised to fix and hadn't. He sat in all of it and felt, underneath the ordinary noise of his ordinary life, something quiet and certain that had been building for 4 months and had stopped needing to announce itself. It was just there. The investigation concluded on a Wednesday in March, which was an ordinary Wednesday in every external respect. Gray sky, leftover snow from the weekend still piled at the curbs in the specific dirty beige color that Chicago winter produces in its final weeks. The city going about itself with the efficient indifference it applied to everything. Gerald Park called Victoria at 8:40 in the morning. She was already at her desk. She was always already at her desk. He told her the findings were complete. He told her the investigative firm had produced a 214-page report documenting 18 months of interference by Richard Mosley, diverted communications, selectively withheld financial data, coordinated media placement through a third-party firm whose invoice trail had taken 6 weeks to follow but had been followed completely. He told her that Mosley's legal team had been presented with the findings the previous Friday and had spent the weekend negotiating, and that this morning they had reached an agreement: full resignation from any affiliated board positions, a signed non-disclosure, and a financial settlement that would be directed, at Victoria's insistence, into Hale Systems' Employee Development Fund rather than into the company's general operating account. She listened to all of it, said, "And the Southeast Partnership?" "Fully executed as of last Tuesday," Gerald said. "You knew that." I needed to hear it in the same sentence as Mosley being gone. Gerald made a sound that was the closest thing to a laugh she'd heard from him in 6 months. "It's in the same sentence, Victoria. It's done." She sat at her desk after hanging up and looked out the window at the gray sky and the Lake Michigan shoreline visible between buildings, steel-colored in the March light, and she did not cry because she was not built that way. But she sat very still for several minutes in a way that was its own kind of release. Then she texted Ethan, "It's done. All of it." He replied in 4 minutes. "How do you feel?" She thought about that for a moment. She typed, "Like I can breathe through both lungs again," then deleted it because it was too neat. Typed instead, "Tired. Really tired." And "okay," both at the same time. He replied, "That's the honest answer. Come to dinner tonight. Sophie's making something. I use the word making loosely. She found a recipe and she's supervising me while I execute it." Victoria looked at her phone. Outside her window, a pigeon landed on the ledge and regarded the city with the flat authority of something that had never been impressed by any of it. "What time?" she typed. 7. "Don't bring anything." She brought wine anyway because she was constitutionally incapable of arriving empty-handed, which Ethan had accepted as a fixed condition of her character, the same way she'd accepted that he would always be 5 minutes early to everything and would always notice when something was wrong before she'd finished deciding to tell him. Sophie met her at the door with flour on her elbow and the specific focused expression she wore when managing a project. "We're making chicken piccata," she announced. "I found the recipe in a book. There were 2 options and I chose the harder one." "Obviously," Victoria said. "The lemon sauce is the important part," Sophie said, already turning back toward the kitchen. "Dad keeps wanting to skip a step and I keep telling him you can't skip the step." "You cannot skip the step," Victoria confirmed, following her in. Ethan was at the stove with his back to them, and he turned when he heard her voice, and the look on his face was the same one she'd been trying to find a name for since approximately the 2nd week of knowing him. Not dramatic, not performed, just present. The look of someone genuinely glad she was in the room. "How are you?" he said. And he meant it the way he always meant it, which was the actual question, not the social formality. "I'm okay," she said. "Both lungs." He nodded. "Sit down. Sophie's in charge of the sauce, so for the love of everything, don't distract her." "I heard that," Sophie said, without turning from the counter where she was measuring lemon juice with the precision of a scientist. The dinner was imperfect in the specific ways that real dinners are. The chicken was slightly overcooked on one side. The sauce was good, but too thick until Sophie added more liquid. And Ethan said I thought we weren't skipping steps, and Sophie said adjusting is not skipping, it's responding to conditions, which was such a complete and accurate statement that neither of them had a response to it. They ate at the small table in Ethan's kitchen, the 3 of them, the apartment warm from the oven and the overhead light doing what overhead lights do, which is nothing atmospheric but enough. Sophie told them about a project at school, a presentation on ocean ecosystems that she'd been building for 2 weeks and had, by her own assessment, mostly nailed. She described her teacher's feedback with the balanced fairness of someone who could accept partial criticism without either dismissing it or catastrophizing it, and Victoria watched her and thought, "This child is going to be formidable. She already is." After dinner, Sophie did homework at the kitchen table with the focused self-sufficiency she applied to most things, and Ethan and Victoria sat on the couch with the particular ease of two people who'd stopped having to find their way into comfort with each other and now just inhabited it. The television was off. The city outside was doing its quiet late-week thing. "What happens now?" Ethan asked. He said it without context because he didn't need to provide it. They both knew the question was larger than tonight. Victoria thought about it honestly. "The board restructure finalizes in April. Karen Yee takes over as chair formally. We onboard the Southeast partners in May." She turned her wine glass. "The company's going to be bigger, more complicated. I'm going to have to hire a COO finally, which I've been avoiding for 2 years because I don't trust easily." "You'll find the right person." "Maybe." She looked at the window. "Gerald wants me to take a real vacation. He's been saying it for 2 years. He got very pointed about it last week." "He's right." "I know he's right." She paused. "I don't know how to do a vacation." "You pack a bag and go somewhere and don't work." "That's reductive." "That's also accurate." She looked at him with the expression she had for when he said something plain that she couldn't actually argue with. He held it without flinching, which was one of the things about him she'd stopped being able to imagine not having. "I was thinking," she said carefully, "about somewhere warm, in May, after the onboarding." She stopped. "Sophie has a school break in May." Ethan was quiet. "I'm not assuming," she said. "I'm just saying a thing that I thought." "Sophie would need a passport," he said. "I know." "She doesn't have one." "Passports take 6 to 8 weeks to process," Victoria said, "if you apply in March." He looked at her. The something in his face had shifted into something she was only starting to know how to read. Not the glad she's here look, something further along than that. Something that was looking at the future rather than the present. "You looked up the processing time," he said. "I looked up the processing time," she admitted. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You'd take a vacation." "I'd try." "You'd actually put your laptop away." "I said I'd try. Let's not overcommit." He laughed. She felt it move through her the way it always did, easy and real in hers. "Yeah," he said. "Okay, we'll apply for the passport." March became April the way seasons change in Chicago. Not gradually, but in lurches. Warm days ambushed by cold ones, the city oscillating between winter's last arguments and spring's first evidence. The trees in Lincoln Park started doing something preliminary with their buds. Lakeshore Drive got its color back. The board restructure finalized on April 9th. Karen Yee sent Victoria a bottle of wine and a card that said, in Karen's characteristically direct handwriting, "You held the room. Don't forget that." Victoria put the card in her desk drawer rather than her recycling, which was, for her, a significant act of sentimentality. Mosley's name appeared once more in the press, a brief item noting his resignation from 2 other board positions he'd held, and then receded. The world moved on to other stories, as it does, as it always does, with the blameless efficiency of something that was never personally invested to begin with. The stories about Ethan had been quiet since the statement in November. The internet's attention had the half-life of a mayfly on most things, and a warehouse manager in Pilsen who declined to give interviews and had no social media presence offered nothing to sustain a narrative. He remained, as he'd always been, a private person living a specific life in a specific neighborhood, taking Sophie to school and managing inventory and cooking dinners that were sometimes good and sometimes not, and being exactly who he was without amendment. This was the thing that stayed with Victoria, the thing she turned over sometimes at her desk when the work paused and her mind went somewhere real, the thing she'd been trying to articulate to herself since October and had only recently found the language for. She'd spent years in a world that ran on presentation, on the managed version of things. Her investors wanted a CEO who looked the part, which meant looking a part she'd never entirely fit. Not the right size, not the right gender in certain rooms, Not the right history, not the legacy hire, or the Stanford pedigree, or the telegenic founder who photographed well. She'd compensated with performance. With competence so consistent it couldn't be argued with preparation so thorough it foreclosed objection, with a professional armor she'd put on so many mornings in a row that she'd stopped feeling its weight. And then a man had shown up to a blind date with a sewn-on button and told her she looked genuinely great in the same sentence where he'd said something plain and true about the cruelty of strangers. And she'd sat across from him at a table the room had decided was ridiculous and thought, he's not performing anything. That was it. That was the thing. In a world of managed versions, he was the unmanaged one. He didn't have a persona to maintain because he'd never built one. He was a father and a warehouse manager, and a man who paid attention and said true things and drove a 2019 Civic without apology. And none of that was a statement or a brand or a chosen narrative. It was just what was real. She hadn't known, until she met him, how much she'd been starving for that. She thought about this on an evening in mid-April when she was at his apartment. It was a Thursday, which had stayed their day in the way certain days become associated with certain people without anyone deciding it. And Sophie was asleep, and Ethan was washing dishes, and she was sitting on the counter the way she'd started doing, not asking, just arriving there. And he hadn't said anything about it except to hand her a dish towel the first time, as if she'd been doing it for years. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask me anything," he said, without turning from the sink. "Do you ever wish I was different?" He turned off the water, turned to look at her. "What kind of different?" "Less complicated." She held his gaze. "Easier, less public, less work." He thought about it in the honest way he thought about things, which meant he didn't immediately reassure her. He dried his hands on his jeans. He never used the dish towel she was holding. She'd noticed this, and leaned against the counter. "Sometimes," he said, "I wish the outside stuff was easier. The coverage, the board stuff, the noise." He was precise about it. "But that's not you being complicated. That's the situation. The situation is part of me. It's part of your life. You're not the board meeting, Victoria." He held her eyes. "You're the person who drives on roads that feel like nothing when it gets too heavy. You're the person who gave Sophie a full answer about quorums because she deserved a real answer. You're the person who has Gerald Park's number memorized and could tell me exactly what he argued in your Series A term sheet because it mattered and you paid attention." He paused. "I don't wish that was different." She looked at him for a moment. "That was a very specific answer." "You asked a specific question." She looked at her hands, then back up at him. "I've been thinking about May," she said. "I know." "Sophie's passport came." "I know that too. She checked the mail every day for 3 weeks." Something in his expression. "She carried it around for 2 days after it arrived. I had to convince her to put it somewhere safe." "She's excited." "She's been researching marine ecosystems in the Caribbean for a month," Ethan said. "She has a list of species she wants to see snorkeling that she's ranked by likelihood of sighting. It's laminated." Victoria looked at him. "She laminated it." "At the school library. She asked the librarian for help." Victoria pressed her lips together. Failed, laughed. The real one, the one that took up the right amount of space. "She's going to be either a marine biologist or the head of a small country," she said. "She can't decide either," Ethan said. "She's been researching whether they're mutually exclusive." The laughter faded into something quieter, something that lived in the space between amusement and something larger. The kitchen light was on. The city outside the window was doing its April thing, the air through the cracked window carrying the first real smell of something other than winter. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah." She looked at him. She'd been careful with things for so long. Careful with her words, careful with her image, careful with what she let show and to whom, and in what proportion. And she was tired of it in the specific way of someone who'd recognized a habit and couldn't unlearn it but wanted to. "I love you," she said. Plain, unmanaged. Just the true thing, said directly. The way he'd taught her without meaning to. He looked at her for a moment. The dish towel was still in her hands. The sink was still wet. The apartment was quiet and specific and real. "I know," he said, soft. "I've known for a while." You could have said something. You needed to say it first, he said. That felt important. She looked at him. You waited. I'm patient when it matters. She thought about all the things she could say to that and chose none of them. She set the dish towel down and crossed the small kitchen, and he met her halfway, which was something she'd noticed about him from very early. He always met her halfway. Not all the way, not staying put and making her come to him, not overreaching and crowding the distance. Halfway. Every time. They stood together in his kitchen for a while. I love you too, he said against her hair. For what it's worth. It's worth quite a bit, she said. The proposal happened in May, as these things do, in a way that was not what either of them might have written on paper. There was no orchestrated restaurant moment, no skyline backdrop rented for the occasion, no surprise assembled from moving parts that had to be managed into position. It happened on the third evening of their trip, a small island in the Turks and Caicos that Victoria had chosen after the research she'd claimed not to be doing, a place with a beach that went pale green at the edges and blue further out, the kind of blue that looks edited until you're standing in front of it and realize it's just water being honest about itself. Sophie had spent the afternoon snorkeling with a guide who'd been patient with her species list and genuinely impressed by her accuracy on 3 identifications, and she was tired in the good way, sun-tired, ocean-tired, the particular fatigue of a body that's done exactly what it wanted to do all day. She'd eaten dinner without narrating and gone quiet in a way that meant she was almost under. Victoria and Ethan sat on the small terrace outside their adjoining rooms after Sophie had gone to bed, the night coming in warm and salt-smelling, the ocean a dark sound in the middle distance. He had 2 beers and she had wine, and the sky was doing something with stars that Chicago never permitted, because Chicago had too many opinions about the dark. They talked about small things, about Sophie's species list and which items she'd checked off, about the COO candidate Victoria was interviewing in June, a woman from Portland who'd built and sold 2 companies and who Gerald had described as exactly as difficult as you need her to be, which Victoria had taken as a strong endorsement, about a book Ethan had been reading, a history of the shipping industry that he'd picked up for work reasons and kept reading for other reasons, about nothing, about everything. About the particular freedom of sitting somewhere that wasn't their city, wasn't their context, wasn't the ongoing construction project of their regular lives. At some point, the conversation went quiet in a way that wasn't uncomfortable. The ocean kept doing its thing. Ethan put his beer down. He looked at the dark water for a moment. Then he looked at her. I've been carrying something around for about 2 months, he said. She turned to look at him. He reached into his pocket and put a ring on the arm of her chair. Not dramatically, just set it there. She looked at it. It was simple. A gold band with a single stone, not enormous, not trying to be. The kind of thing chosen by someone who'd paid attention to what she actually wore rather than what the occasion was supposed to require. I'm not going to make a speech, he said. You know what I think about you. You've known for a while. He held her eyes. I want to keep knowing you. I want Sophie to grow up knowing you. I want Thursdays and bad eggs and your whiteboard in the living room and the drives on roads that feel like nothing. He paused. I want the whole thing, whatever that is. I want to figure it out with you. She looked at the ring on the arm of her chair, then at him. You've been carrying that for 2 months, she said. I bought it in February. I've been waiting for the right time, and then I realized there's no right time. There's just time. And I'd rather spend mine with you than wait for conditions to improve. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the rooftop restaurant and the laughing room, and the way she'd walked toward table 14 with the practiced armor of a woman who'd been told her whole life that love was a thing she'd have to accept on other people's terms. She thought about a 7-year-old handing her a drawing of a vampire squid with the unself-conscious generosity of someone who hadn't yet learned to ration what she gave. She thought about boardrooms and settlements and articles and the long drives and the late-night phone calls and the kitchen counter and the dish towel and halfway, every time. She thought about what it actually cost to let someone see you. Not the version you've prepared, not the CEO, not the woman who has the answer before the question is finished, but the actual person, the one who drives alone on empty roads and makes bad eggs and still hasn't fully learned how to ask for help. He'd seen that person. Not because she'd arranged it, because he'd paid attention and she'd been too tired to manage it, and somewhere in between those two things, something real had happened. Yes, she said. He picked the ring up from the arm of the chair and she held out her hand. Not the studied gesture of a staged moment, just her hand, slightly unsteady. And he put it on, and it fit because he'd found out her ring size from a piece of jewelry she'd left on his kitchen counter 3 weeks ago, and she'd never noticed it was gone. And that specificity, that quiet attentiveness, made her eyes go hot in a way she didn't try to manage. "It fits," she said. "I measured." "I know you measured." She looked at it on her hand in the low light of the terrace. "Of course you measured." He picked up his beer. She picked up her wine. The ocean kept going. The stars kept doing their thing, unhurried, the way they do when they've been at it long enough not to need an audience. "We should probably tell Sophie tomorrow," he said. "She's going to have questions about the legal implications of blended family structures," Victoria said. "Almost certainly. She's going to want to know what she calls me." "I know." He paused. "What do you want her to call you?" She thought about that. A 7-year-old who checked the mail every day for her passport and laminated her snorkeling list and corrected adults politely and precisely, and had looked at Victoria on a first meeting with the flat, honest assessment of someone who needed no buffer. "I want her to call me whatever she decides," Victoria said. "It should be hers." He nodded. She knew he would have said the same thing. They sat on the terrace until the beers and the wine were done, and the night had gotten on in the easy way of nights that don't need to go anywhere. And eventually they went inside, and the ocean outside kept its rhythm, constant and indifferent, and somehow right. Here is what doesn't get said often enough about stories like this one. It was not a fairy tale. It never was. The months that followed were good, and they were also hard in the ordinary ways that two people with full, complicated lives are hard when they decide to make something together. Victoria hired the Portland COO, a woman named Susan Rihe, who was exactly as difficult as Gerald had promised, and who Victoria got along with the way she got along with people who didn't require her to be less than she was. The Southeast expansion hit 3 significant delays in Q3 and 1 crisis in October that had Victoria on calls until 2 in the morning for a week straight, during which Ethan took Sophie to school every day and made dinner every night and said nothing about it because it didn't need to be said. They argued. Real arguments. Not dramatic, not cruel, but the genuine kind that come from 2 strong-willed people learning where their edges are. They argued twice about money, which was hard because the disparity was real and neither of them could pretend otherwise. They argued once, badly, about a decision Victoria made regarding Sophie's school schedule without consulting him first, and he was right to be upset, and she was wrong, and saying so took her longer than it should have, and that was the honest version of it. They found their way back each time through the same route. Someone said the true thing, and the other person listened. Sophie processed the engagement with the thoroughness she applied to everything. She asked, in order, what the legal definition of a step-parent was, whether Victoria would be moving into their apartment or they would be moving into hers, what would happen to Sophie's room in either scenario, and whether the Anomalocaris drawing could come with them. She was told yes to the drawing, that they would find something larger than either current apartment, and that her room would be hers. She nodded through all of it and said, "Okay, I think Victoria is good at making decisions." She paused, as long as she explains her reasoning. Victoria, upon being told this, said, "Fair." They found an apartment in Lakeview in February. Not Victoria's building, not Ethan's neighborhood, a place that was neither of theirs, and therefore both. It had a second bedroom for Sophie that faced east, a living room large enough for Victoria's whiteboard, a kitchen with a gas range that Ethan immediately had opinions about, and a building with a freight elevator wide enough for the kind of furniture that comes with a person who's been living alone successfully for 9 years and has made the furniture choices accordingly. Moving day was a Saturday. Marcus came and was enthusiastic in ways that were mostly helpful. Sophie directed the placement of her furniture with a precision that involved a hand-drawn floor plan she'd made in advance, which the movers good-naturedly followed because she asked them nicely and thanked them specifically, naming each person, which was a thing she'd always done and would always do. Gerald Park came by in the afternoon, which surprised Victoria. He stood in the living room looking at the half-unpacked boxes and the whiteboard leaning against the wall waiting to be hung, and Ethan's collection of dog-eared paperbacks already in a pile near the bookshelf that hadn't been assembled yet. "You look different," he said to Victoria. "I'm the same," she said. He shook his head. "You're not." He didn't say it badly, just observationally, the way of a man who'd known her through 3 funding rounds and 1 hostile board, and a company that had gone from 2 rooms in Wicker Park to 31 states. "You carry yourself differently." She thought about that. "Less armor," she said. "Some armor," he said. "You still need some armor." "I know." "But less," he agreed. He shook Ethan's hand and told Sophie that her floor plan was the most organized moving strategy he'd seen in 40 years, which made Sophie stand slightly taller without making a visible effort to. And then he left because he was 70 years old and moving days were for younger people. Ethan came to stand next to Victoria in the living room after he'd gone, the two of them looking at the organized chaos of 2 lives being put into the same space. "Is it weird?" he asked. "No," she said. "It's a lot. That's different from weird." "You okay?" She looked around at the whiteboard and the paperbacks and Sophie's hand-drawn floor plan magneted to the refrigerator they'd moved from his place because hers was newer, but his was bigger, one of those small, specific negotiations that make up a life. "Yeah," she said. "I'm okay." And she meant it. Not okay as a managed response. Not the professional even version of fine. Okay in the way of something that was true. The people who'd laughed at them at Vertigo Sky Lounge on a Tuesday in July moved on with their lives, as people do. The gossip site that had run the photo moved on to other subjects. The woman who'd murmured what a waste into her companion's ear as she passed their table probably didn't remember them, and that was the right amount of power to give that. What they'd built was not a story the world had approved of. It wasn't assembled from the parts the world had designated for people like them. It was made from Thursday phone calls and bad eggs, and a laminated species list and a ring that fit because he'd paid attention, and it was imperfect in the ways that real things are imperfect, and it was theirs. There is something that the public accounting of other people's love always gets wrong. It makes it look like the destination was the point, the proposal, the apartment, the announcement, as if what mattered was the arrival. What actually mattered was Ethan Cross at a kitchen table at 6 in the morning drinking too much coffee because he was worried, and Victoria Hale in a parking structure because it was the only place nobody needed something from her, and a 7-year-old who noticed both of these things and loved them anyway, and the space the 3 of them made between themselves that wasn't perfect and wasn't easy and wasn't a fairy tale, just real, just chosen, just theirs. The world has a lot of opinions about who deserves love and in what form, and whether the package is right, and whether the numbers add up. It has a lot of opinions about bodies and bank accounts, and what a couple is supposed to look like when the room takes its first assessment. What the world doesn't always account for is what happens when 2 people decide that its opinions are not the point. When they look at each other across a table, the room has already decided is a mistake, and neither of them leaves. That decision, that small, unspectacular, completely unremarkable decision to stay, is where everything worth having actually begins. Not in the grand gesture, not in the moment that photographs well, in the staying, in the showing up on Thursdays, in the sewn-on button and the drawn floor plan, and the 40-minute drives on empty roads and the dish towel that never gets used, and the words said plainly because plain was the only honest way to say them. Sophie Cross. She kept his name, at least for now, though she'd told them both she was reserving judgment on the hyphenation question until she'd reviewed the long-term implications, which made Victoria laugh and Ethan cover his face with his hand, grew up to be precisely as formidable as both of them had suspected. At 8, she published a short essay in her school's science newsletter about cephalopod intelligence that the teacher submitted to a regional student journal. At 9, she informed Victoria that she'd been thinking about corporate governance structures and had a question about voting rights in shareholder agreements, and Victoria sat down and explained the whole thing, which took 45 minutes, and Sophie asked follow-up questions that were not always easier than the original answer. At 10, she told her father that she thought Victoria was the best decision he'd ever made. He said, "I think you're right." She said, I know I'm right, and went back to her encyclopedia. He stood in the kitchen doorway of their Lakeview apartment, watching his daughter read, and thought about all the things a person can't know. At 32, sitting in a restaurant with the wrong tie knotted twice, about what the next 10 years will hand them, about who will stay, about what will be built, about a Tuesday in July when a room full of strangers looked at a man and a woman across a table and decided the whole story in about 30 seconds, and were wrong about all of it. He went back to the kitchen and started dinner. Through the living room doorway, he could hear Victoria on the phone, the COO, from the sound of it, working through something. And her voice in that mode was precise and energetic and entirely herself, the woman who'd built something from a 2-room apartment in Wicker Park and hadn't stopped building since. He cooked. Sophie read. Victoria worked. The city outside the windows went about its business, as it always had, as it always would, indifferent and enormous and missing the whole point, the way cities always do when the things that matter most are happening in apartments that aren't famous, and between people the world had already looked at and looked away from. All it takes sometimes is for 2 people to look back.